Today's topic is the session or the application state. Web services, as you know, can be stateless, which means that once a service is executed, it doesn't need to remember anything about that interaction. But in most applications, you require an application state, which means there are a group of services which operate as one application, which means if a service gets called and it did something, for instance, it executed a login, then other services need to be aware that a login has been performed and who has performed the login, etc. So this is stored in a session, and ZOAPIIO manages the session for you. So let's see how all that is done. So you see this node here. We're looking at a minimalistic application again. There is this session node. And the parameters here you see, they control how your session is stored and managed and how it's tracked. And inside the session, you declare a structure, just like this is a schema. You can declare anything anywhere. So anything you declare under the node session, in this case, the user info, which is also a structure. It's got more fields in it. So this is assumed to be the application state. That means if a service is stateful, the contents of the session node are preserved and restored automatically by the ZOAPIIO container. Okay. So in this case, let's see what are the parameters. So first thing is how a session is tracked, in the sense when an API is called, how do we know which session it is bound to? So there are a few options. Java application, a Tomcat, if you use, it uses a Tomcat cookie that represents a session. And with every HTTP interaction that comes from outside, from a browser, that cookie is automatically sent. The system will look for a cookie whose name you will provide here. So we can say here, whatever. Notice that we don't use Tomcat's cookie. We declare our own cookie, which means every application you have a choice. You can have multiple applications projects, each bound to a different cookie. Incidentally, the business app or the wizard generated application that in ZOAPIIO uses cookie as a mechanism for session control. Okay, so here now we've declared that this is how the session would be recognized. Then we have to also control how it will be saved. So right now there's only one option, which is database. So your session is serialized and put in the database. And you can also select which database you want to put it in. Generally, your instance will have only one database, so that's where it will go. Now, it's not just enough to provide a cookie name. You also have to go under cookies and add a cookie by that name. So here, you can say we had said that my cookie, so it will be declaring a cookie here tells the system that this is a cookie, and if an HTTP request comes, please extract the value and put it here so your application access it. And if you make a change to any of the cookies, system will make sure the updated cookie is sent back with the response. But this is a session cookie, so you don't have to touch it. System will use it to recognize the session and automatically take care of the storage and retrieval of the session information. Now let's see what are the other options here. The other options is, let's start with this jwt.payload. This is typically used by consumer applications. Modern day consumer applications, they don't use cookie, they use something called a JWT. And JWT has various parts. One part is the payload. It's got signature, header, etc. Other things. But payload is the entire content of the token, which can contain the username and some other information. So here, this means that when an input request is received, it will look for the presence of JWT in the request, extract the payload. First, it'll verify that the token is correctly signed. It'll extract the payload and use, in this case, we can remove this because no cookies involved. It will use the payload as the token as a session identifier. So this is now a preferred way of managing session in consumer applications. So the consumer application that you build in ZOAPIIO, they also use the payload. Now, sometimes you don't want to use the entire payload. You just want to use a specific field inside the payload. And that field is called other. So if you want to control your session identifier, you can put that value of the field other inside the token. Now, how the tokens are managed, you can go and check. There are Java functions available which let you create the token and everything. Please go to the documentation and look for built-in functions or built-in methods in the ZOAPIIO platform. There you will find functions that let you create and sign the JWT. So, and obviously the application, the consumer application that are built by ZOAPIIO, they automatically handle all that. So do not worry about that. But if you're building your own custom front end, then you may want to know how to populate these fields, the JWT, payload, other, depending upon what your requirements are. Now, notice that a session, there's one per session specification for a project. Now, if your application is such that it requires some services to have one type of session binding and another to have a different kind of session binding, then you should create two different projects. And it's perfectly fine. In your instance, you can create as many projects as you want. There's no limitation. And they can all be working together as a part of the same application. So it's really not a constraint. Now, sometimes what you may want is that you want the system, the wizard generated application, which uses cookie, and you want to use the consumer application as a part of the same project. You may want, it's not advised because that makes the project too complex, right? But in case you want to have everything in one project, maybe your application is small enough that you don't need to create multiple projects. It's a simple one. If you want to put everything in one file, that's possible. In that case, you should use this cookie else JWT payload. So now here what happens is anything that the wizard generated application uses, it will have a cookie with it. So it will use cookie. But any of the services that are related to your consumer applications, they will have the JWT payload. So it's if you want to mix and put everything in one project, this is what you would likely use. And of course, you'll provide a cookie and everything else. So the session or the application state is automatically managed. You only specify how you want to save, where you want to save. And any service, when it completes, if a change has been made to the contents of the session, they are serialized and saved back. And anytime a new service is invoked, the contents of the session are automatically. In fact, the first time you refer to a session variable, it will be retrieved from the database. So it's completely transparent to you. You only say, this is my session, this is how it works, and the rest of it, the system worries about. So hope it gave you a good idea of how to write stateful services. And that's all about the session.